Here in studio, Grahame Morris from Barton Deakin. Good to see you. And back with us after some globe trotting in recent weeks or months, is it? I can't recall. Bruce Hawker, the former Labor strategist. Thanks for joining us as well. Now, let's start on the paid parental leave plan. Grahame Morris, are you on a unity ticket with Eva Cox?
I'm beginning to think we might have got this wrong if Eva Cox thinks it's a good idea. I don't think I've ever agreed with anything Eva Cox has said. It's extraordinary. Look, this is raised today because a backbencher, Alex Hawke, has jumped up and down and didn't like it. Well, that was a very helpful contribution, Alex. He needs a bit of an education program, I think. There's this big room, Alex, in Parliament House. It's called a party room. It's got big pictures in black and white there. People like Sir Robert Menzies, John Howard, Malcolm Fraser. That's where things are talked about. And apart from that, 3 years ago, well, quite a while ago, the party had a look at this policy, decided that it wanted it.
This is the thing. A number of MPs are saying that's not exactly how it happened. There wasn't consultation. Tony Abbott announced it.
And then the party room agreed.
Yeah, is that the way it's meant to go?
Yeah, but that was the same with GST, guns. That's what you elect leaders for.
Leaders do have some room to move on these things, but this is a policy that upsets a lot of coalition MPs.
It is one of those awkward principle things. You know, one of the big principles for the Liberal Party is economic management, and that's what Alex Hawke is on about. But the other is freedom of the individual and choice. And for many, many women, there is no choice when you have a baby about whether you stay home. You know, you stay home for a couple of weeks, then you've got to go back to work. The Abbott thing gives women more choice. And I think that is one of the things that could be very, very important in this policy. But if it wasn't for the economic policy, if it wasn't for the blinking deficit Wayne Swan's given, there wouldn't be a problem.
Look, I agree there are arguments in favour of this. But looking at Alex Hawke, his decision to go public on this, politically, he's not stupid. He knows that no one's talking publicly about this, even though privately plenty of them are. Why do you think he's done this? It's a calculated decision.
Some of his contributions in the past haven't been terribly helpful. And maybe, just over the next few years, he might decide to work out how to spell the word team and not make it a four-letter word.
Bruce Hawker, the fact that you've got big business criticising this and the likes of Eva Cox and others supporting it, it does look a bit odd, doesn't it, for Labor to come down on the side of big business and say, no, we can't afford this.
Well, Labor has got a paid parental scheme and it's responsible and affordable, and that's the difference between theirs and the one that the opposition's looking to introduce, David. And that's, I think, where I think some people in the Liberal Party are starting to scratch their heads about some of Tony Abbott and Hockey's economic policies. They've now got two levies that they're going to introduce if they're elected. One for the NDIS, which they support, and the other one for the paid parental scheme, which will, as you said, be $75,000 or up to that amount for any parent for the first 6 months of their leave. And that'll be paid for by a 1.5% increase in company tax, which is a disincentive for business.
This is the thing. Any woman earning more than the minimum wage, this is a pretty attractive option for them. Even if it's big business, it's going to pay. You're going to get more from Tony Abbott, significantly more from Tony Abbott, if you earn more than the minimum wage. And
I think that was the whole purpose behind Tony Abbott's policy. It was only a few years ago that he said that a paid parental scheme would be introduced, quote, over his dead body. And now he's supportive of one, and I think it coincided with a real problem he had with the female vote. So I always saw that this as being a very politically driven, somewhat cynical move on his part, but one which was very much out of kilter with the prevailing mood inside the Liberal Party. Hence, I think the public statements by Alex Hawke, which would be privately endorsed by a lot of people inside the Liberal Party. I heard Turnbull being interviewed on the ABC this morning, and he was doing everything he possibly could to say he supported it without saying he actually supported it. It was one of those bizarre conversations.
He's probably got plenty of people in his electorate who would benefit from it. I think it's more of the Nationals MPs who have a bigger problem with it privately.
Well, yes, but there's also a lot of people who have got the ear of big business who are saying to them, listen, this is a 1.5% hike in in company tax, which is being promoted by a Liberal opposition. What's all that about? At a time when business really doesn't need to be paying more tax, rather they should be paying less, perhaps, to encourage more employment.
And they're entitled to pass that on, these companies like Coles and Woolies, aren't they?
And they will, and they will.
So we're all gonna pay.
Look, I agree with everything everyone has said on this. It's not easy. But the leader has a bee in his bonnet about this. He wants it. He's keen on it. Has been for some time. And the party itself said, look, on balance, so do we. We hate the idea that you've got to consider this at a time of economic awkwardness, but it may well be that business out of this gets much better employers, much happier employees, and people who come back to work in much better frame of life. And plus, we might have kids grow up who know their parents. What a good idea.
Now, let me shift to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is also requiring a new tax, a new levy on top of the Medicare levy. I'm keen for both of your thoughts on this. It's a pretty rare thing these days to see bipartisan support. Virtually, we're not quite there yet, but it looks like we will have, on a new tax. Grahame, what did you make of this?
Look, a couple of things. One, I think the Prime Minister was trying to wedge Tony Abbott and lock him into a corner, which he neatly got out of by just saying, me too, but show us where the rest of the money is coming from. That's awkward. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting and people are starting to talk about, was it the Prime Minister trying to say, hey, I will put this against my legacy? And there's an interesting debate happening in Canberra at the moment among former senior journalists, or former departmental heavies and whatnot, who go right back. And the discussion at the moment is, where is the Prime Minister and this government in the pecking order in the history of Australia? And the moment the consensus seems to be that she is the second worst Prime Minister Australia has had, leading the worst government. And she could probably think, well, blimey, if I lose this election, what are people going to remember me for? And I think she's decided it's this. But I think one of the really disgraceful things the Prime Minister is doing is saying, hey, this is all me. No, it's not. It was all started with Bill Shorten. He's the man, he's the foundation man on the disability insurance scheme. He doesn't get one pat on the back.
Well, whoever is responsible for it, I think most agree that it's a good thing for those who are going to be supported by it. But politically, Bruce, it was unusual, wasn't it, to see agreement or virtual agreement on this?
It was, and I think it was once again over the internal protestations of Joe Hockey and others, who are on the one hand trying to hold the government to account for what they see as profligacy, and at the other hand going down this path themselves with, as I said before, 2 levies if they're elected in the coming year. That means 2 new taxes effectively. So that's the reason why I think that you'll see strong internal dissension around this issue. I remember watching Sky, it was December last year, when Joe Hockey started pouring cold water on the whole idea of the NDIS, saying it'd have to be at some time further down the track when they were in strong position, etc., etc. All these qualifications being built into it. I think that he has been done over right royally by Tony Abbott on this issue, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why it's just opened up a little chink of light there for Labor when it comes to this question about economic credibility, because, you know, on the one hand they're going out there trying to say that Labor's throwing money, they're the big tax and spend government, etc., when on the other hand, you know, under Abbott, they're going down a path which is which is not all that far removed from where Labor is, and in fact they're increasing a tax on companies when Labor is going to decrease the tax on companies. So, you know, that's a weird situation that we've got at the moment, and I think it says a lot about Tony Abbott's style of leadership, which is probably less liberal and more old-style DLP. Just
talking about economic credibility, Labor's will be put to the test again next week when the budget's handed down a week from tomorrow. Now, the signs that have been coming out ahead of the budget, and the narrative, I suppose, that the government's been telling to prepare people for this budget does seem to have been somewhat confused between the need for cuts and spending and not cutting to the bone. And what do you think, Bruce? Has the government done a good job or a bad job of setting the framework for this budget?
Well, I think it would have been tougher were it not for the fact that Tony Abbott's coming in and basically supporting everything they're doing. I do think, though, that they had to make some tough calls. You know, clearly they weren't going to get the balanced or surplus budget that they've been talking about. So it was important to try to turn, that negative into a positive by pushing hard on the NDIS and on Gonski. Education has been the way to the future for Australia's kids, and also a more competitive Australia in a much tougher world in the 21st century. And of course, NDIS is being emblematic of fairness, which is what the Labor Party's all about in most people's minds.
But what about the economic story?
Well, I think, as I said, I think it's been made a little easier by Tony Abbott in the last few days. Having said that, having just come back from the Northern Hemisphere, I mean, Australia is in so much better condition than any of these countries in the Northern Hemisphere. It's just laughable. You know, low unemployment, low debt, all these factors which are so much different from the Northern Hemisphere. I think Labor has to keep pounding away at that point and saying the sky is not about to fall in, even though we do have a deficit.
We'll presumably see a lot of charts and graphs from Wayne Swan comparing us to other countries once again. Graham, what do you think about this budget build-up?
I actually think he has lowered expectations so much that if he spells Commonwealth budget correctly, he'll get a tick. Look, the big one is the surplus, or the deficit, lack of surplus. You know, if the deficit is somewhere between 1 to 5, people will say, well done. If it's somewhere around 10 to 12, people will say he's a goose and continue to say he's a goose. And if it's 15 billion plus, he ought to be sacked. This budget has got to bring back some confidence across the board with everyone. And I just don't think he's going to do it.
Well, we'll find out, and no doubt talk to you both about the budget next week. Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure.
After the break, we're going to be talking a bit more about